Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon at 7:30 here in Amman. And we're really happy to be with the community during this lovely morning. So thank you all for joining us. A little bit of a background on why we've chosen this topic. It's actually, like since the introduction of Sitecore 10, there's a lots and lots of hype around it, and lots of new things that coming around. There's no opportunities, there is new features to tackle. So we are being put in a position where we can choose between, like if we're building something new on Sitecore, should we go directly to Sitecore 10? Or if we're upgrading and we want to go to Sitecore 10, what are the different options that we can have and we can really consider about that? So in order to have a better understanding and a better, let's say, planning for the future of our customers, it's really important to dive in a little bit into these different opportunities and see how we can leverage that to the best of the Sitecore capabilities. So before we dive in into this session, let's start by introducing our speakers. So a little bit of a background about us. So my name is Ishraq, for those who don't know me. I've been working with Sitecore for more than 10 years now. And I've seen it all, I think, with Sitecore, and I've been had the pleasure of witnessing all of these progression and development in it as a platform, and we're still going strong, so that's good. Been a Sitecore MVP for 6 years now, and I had the opportunity to speak in this very event, I think for 4 years now, so thank you for this opportunity. So over to you, Nabeel.
Hi, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, guys. My name is Nabeel, and I am a co-founder of AppleStick. I've been working in the industrial automation for more than half of my life before shifting my focus into building customer experience. Maybe I didn't spend a decade of my life working with Sitecore, but with my 7 years of experience working with it, I am excited to share this experience with you during this SUGCON and the various user groups that I've been doing so far. So let's jump on.
All right. So let's get into it. Okay, so we all have seen the shift in the technology stack that Sitecore is using over the past couple of years, right? With the introduction of Sitecore 10, we've been empowered with a various number of tools. And even when you want to think about what development option you want your team to take or to choose from, we actually still have web forms. I know it's sad, but like out there's still a couple of projects that going on web forms. You have the option to develop using MVC. We have GSS that our front end are so much excited about. We have SXA, which is my favorite, and I'm a fan of it. And now we have rendering hosts. So whether Sitecore is shifting towards more embrace of SaaS offerings, or we've seen that with the Content Hub, or trying to go with more of a more full headless adaptation between GSS and now this new headless experience. So if you want to think about your upgrade of your solution, it's no longer just a lift and shift of technology. You can't just think about it as I want to have my same repo, my same code, the same technology, just move it up to the latest and greatest in Sitecore. We've seen like these new changes in Sitecore 10 give us a lot of opportunities to work with. And I call them opportunities because it actually opens the door for us to think twice and see if we can get rid of all these technical debt. Since we're doing an investment and doing an upgrade, let's start a conversation around how we can enhance the limitation of current solutions. So since this almost touches every aspect of our platform, there's a lots and lots of things to think about. Now, let's take, for example, general thought behind when you want to start a new Sitecore build or you want to do an upgrade. Sitecore Helix started going strong. So whether you're a fan of it or not, regardless of your interpretation of Helix, in a way or another, you're going to wind up working on a Helix-based implementation. So Helix is still going strong, and this is one of the main considerations to think about. The .NET framework, and we've seen Microsoft more shift towards supporting more and more features in .NET Core, and with hopefully the introduction of .NET Framework 5, we are anticipating how Sitecore are going to adapt to that. So keep an eye on that, and this is something we're going to touch base on it shortly. Headless, and I think this is one of the most common word I've been hearing just recently, and lots of discussions around that. And we're going to touch base on what's new in Sitecore 10 around that, because I know we've seen over the years a huge amount of presentation session and actual use cases of leveraging JSS, for example, on that. And these are great things to look at. Definitely content. Content is the main building block of a Sitecore platform. So how we can maintain our content in a way that's within the platform. It's out of the box offering, and instead of looking at third-party tools. So that's a huge part of the Sitecore process that's now being brought home, as you can say. Your content migration definitely in all the 9 yards when it comes to that. We've heard a lot about the new acquisition, right? So we have Boxever, we have 451, we have Musend. So when you keep listening and seeing like all of these new acquisitions, and the main question would be, how are we going to keep a track and be up to speed with all of these new things? So if you tune in during the SUGCON and hopefully in later user groups, you're going to see lots and lots of discussion around that. So I encourage you to look at these things. And finally, again, deployments is a huge part of any solution build. So, or even that Sitecore have given a consideration about that with containerization and stuff. So we're going to talk about all of these things shortly. So again, as you can see, when you want to just take a look under the hood of the backend, I'm not going to say it backend, but let's say like the development of any Sitecore platform, or even upgrade to the latest and greatest in Sitecore. There's a huge spectrum of topics that are beyond the the coverage of this session. However, and for the sake of this session, our agendas, we're gonna touch base on containers. Again, there's I think Dylan Young already spoke about that. We have my actually new favorite thing, and we're gonna have a little bit of a deep dive with Sitecore Content Serialization. And finally, we're gonna touch base a little bit on what's called this new headless experience or headless developments, and what's the new .NET Core support to look at that could be actually interesting to work with. So again, by all means, this is not intended to push towards any adaptation of these things in Sitecore, but rather as attempt to shed the light on all of these new capabilities that we had the chance to work with, and see how we can leverage this to the best of our abilities. So again, if someone like your client, your development manager is asking you, okay, we're gonna do this Sitecore 10, but why should I move and start a whole new build or refactoring of everything to these new things? At least you would know why we are excited about that. So let's get to it. All right, first thing first, containerization. And containers or discussions around the containers and the communities is not new. The community actually started this discussion a couple of years ago with making a number of Docker images open source and available for the community to play with. With Sitecore 10, we have seen a public adaptation and support from Sitecore to containers, and that includes Docker and Kubernetes. So why we are excited about that? So if I just take one aspect of it and talk a little bit about that, which is deployments. If you want to deploy a container, you're actually deploying everything that's required to run on that application side, a single artifact. So it includes your application, it includes all the dependencies, libraries, even the configuration assets, anything that is needed that is wrapped within a single asset that you can easily share between environments. So what does that mean? It means if one of your team members has successfully spin off Sitecore Commerce in one of their environment, they can share it successfully between your team members as easy as that. And that's just an example. But we all seen the different issues there. Working with different environments, working with different developer machines that can come, right? So we have, I'm gonna just move on my mic. All right. So we have, again, we've seen while working with Ceph, for example, the dependencies on certain versions and libraries of the PowerShell and this kind of stuff. And we've seen the bin, right? And sometimes it's working in one machine and the other is not. So imagine that you can put everything in one place and just share that across your own team. And again, it opens lots and lots of doors for development teams. Same thing with onboarding. I recall that I've once worked with a client where it took us 3 weeks to get onboarded on a project just because there was a huge dependency on developer environment. So every time we had just the pain of onboarding someone new or just switching between the branches, and all you have to have now is a way of building something, being able to share it, speed up spinning of local development. For us as a company, we typically rely on using virtual machines. So every time I think about adding a new team member or a new project, thinking about the server capacities, the resources in our subscriptions, and this kind of stuff. So now, and instead of thinking about dedicating all of these things for every single client or a project that we're working with, it's more flexible in terms of sharing these resources, turn it on and off as needed, and that's about it. So it's make it easy to work on multiple projects. And as Jason Sansina, I'm gonna quote him on this because I like the way he describes containers. So it's the ability for the delivery teams to move to a continuous delivery model even more easily with infrastructure as a code deployment. So think about, we know the platform as a service, we know the infrastructure as a service, but now think about it as an infrastructure, as a code that can be shared between multiple projects and environments. Very easy. How cool is that? All right. So again, as we mentioned, since Sitecore made it public that it's supporting containers. So if you go to the download page of your Sitecore 10, you'll see that you have that option to download that to support for Docker and Kubernetes images. We won't forget the public Sitecore GitHub repo. We have the Docker images that's maintained by the community and by Sitecore that you can go and, fork or get any version of the Sitecore container image and work with it. And as I've mentioned, I think Dylan Young already covered this on starting with Docker and existing projects during SUGCON. So if you missed that, make sure to watch it later on. And I know that Chile also have been recording a couple of Pluralsight training on this thing. So I'm excited. I'm excited that our team started to adapt that and move towards containers. So that's a good win for us in Sitecore 10. And finally, Sitecore did actually provide a comprehensive documentation on how to develop with containers. And they went even a step further and they created like a starter kit or even like a template that has container that has like a container with already installed headless with the latest of .NET Core in it for you to work with, or even, use it as a starter for your project. So just be aware that some of the Helix architecture might not be fully supported. So just keep an eye on the small details if you were planning to do that. All right. So that's all we want to talk about containers. We're excited to it, but we know like other colleagues have already going to be talking about that. So let's jump to a very exciting new topic, which is the Sitecore Content Serialization. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Nabeel.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. So, hi again, and I'm going to talk more about Sitecore Content Serialization, where you can automate content sharing and deployment. Now, Sitecore has introduced a new way of serializing items natively from within the product itself and without relying on external tools. The SCS system is intended to serialize, share, and deploy items within your various environments while maintaining them inside your source control. So, what is needed to enable this new content serialization capabilities? First, we need Sitecore Management Services, and this is a package that you must download and install in your CM instance to support the SCS tools. This is a normal package. You can find it in your download page named Sitecore.Management Services package, and you can install it to Sitecore similar to any other packages. Second, we need something called Sitecore tools. Sitecore has introduced a couple of tools that satisfy different tastes. We have a command-line option for the CLI lovers that is called Sitecore CLI, which is, by the way, built on top of .NET Core. We also have a graphical interface which you can hook into your Visual Studio, and that is called Sitecore for Visual Studio. Now, as a starter, let's go ahead and install Sitecore CLI tool, for example. Let me try to change the layout. I need to show the full screen of the presentation since I'm going to conduct a demo. Yeah, thank you. So, as a prerequisite, we need to ensure that .NET is installed in your system. One way to do that is to run the command .NET-info. If you have .NET installed, you should have output similar to this. We need also to register Sitecore NuGet package source. Sorry, Sitecore NuGet source. We can check if it's already installed in your system by running the command .NET NuGet list source, and as you can see, it's the third one in my list. But if you don't have it, you can simply run the following command and it will register it in your system. Actually, if I try to run it, I'll get an error since it's already registered. As you can see, the name specified has already added to the list. So it's already registered in my system. Okay, now to keep everything organized, I'm going to create a new folder on my code, on my solution folder. To keep everything organized, I'll call it SCS, and I will install the SCS inside it. Now let's navigate to that in the PowerShell. First thing, we need to run the following command, .NET new tool manifest, and then we need to run another command called .NET tool install Sitecore CLI. That will create a .config folder that contains a JSON file. In this JSON file, you can find the CLI version and other information saved. Now, to ensure that the installation is successful, we can simply type no, it's .NET Sitecore -h, and this is the help command. It will show me the help, and if you get this, then the installation is successful. Now we need to run Sitecore -init to initialize your project, and it will create another set of files inside the folder that we just created. It's that easy. Finally, we need to register plugins, and we can register plugin by running this command. It's .NET Sitecore plugin add and the plugin name. That should be it. So now we have installed and configured the CLI. You can do the same for the Visual Studio. As a reminder, the first thing we did before installing the CLI was installing the Sitecore Management Service package that is essential for both tools to work. Just note that this requires a separate license that you can purchase at the team development for Sitecore website. Next, we need to be logged into Sitecore in order to sync the content. So let's see how we can do login using CLI and Sitecore for Visual Studio. As we mentioned, we can always run the -h command parameter. Sorry, we can always add the -h parameter to see the available help command. And you can run it also for a specific command. So for example, you can say .NET Sitecore login -h to see the help for the login command and to see the available parameter for this specific command. So as you can see, we have some available parameters, and we need to use some of them to execute the login. So let's start. To do a login, we need to start with .NET Sitecore login. And then we need to provide, we will use the authority parameter to provide the identity server URL, where it is responsible for authentication. And then we need to provide the CM URL, which is our content management URL. And finally, we need to set the allow write parameter to true to allow write. Once running this command, we will see a browser window, and we can do a normal login here. But after the login, it will ask us to grant some permissions. Just clicking yes, allow, and going back to the PowerShell screen, we will see that our login information has been saved. And by that, we are already logged into CLI. Now, let's do the same for the Visual Studio. Let's do a login using the Visual Studio. First thing, we need to show the Sitecore Module Explorer by going to View menu, Other Windows, and selecting Sitecore Module Explorer. And we need to add a new environment. Let's call it default. We need to provide almost the same parameter in here, the host, which is our CM URL, and the authority, which is our identity server URL. And we need to provide the client ID. We need to set allow write to true, and when we click refresh token, if you get this error, always make sure that you save your changes. In my case, I didn't save my changes, so let me just go ahead and save it. Now, if I try to refresh access token again, I should get the same login window. Yeah, and I should allow the same, and clicking yes, allow, that will show me the same exact message in here. Your login information has been saved. So by that, we are already registered and logged in into the SVS. Another way to log in would be using silent authentication to avoid getting the login screen all the times. And this is useful in case of CI/CD and continuous delivery. So let's see how we can do that. We need to create a new environment similar to what we did before. We will call it CLI now. We will provide the same parameters, the host and the authority. We will provide the client ID, but we will also provide the client secret. Client ID and client secret is there in the identity server, but we need to add a new XML configuration inside the identity server config folder that should has client ID and client secret, as you can see. So let me start by copying the client secret first. And then I'll copy the client ID. Now, in order for this to work, we should have a configuration added to Sitecore include folder. This configuration should has a client ID equal to the client ID we just configured in the identity server. So that should be it. Let's go ahead and try to refresh access token, or even let's try to go and pull items from Sitecore. As you can see, using this specific environment, I am able to pull items from Sitecore without even having to see that login window. Okay, so now, as we are done with the authentication part of our setup, the next step would be serializing the actual items. To do so, we need first to configure our solution to map these items into modules that mimic your Helix or solution structure, similar to what we used to do when setting up TDS or configuring Unicorn. The nice thing about this is that it builds on our existing knowledge, so you don't need to work with something new, but understand how the new configuration mimic what we already know. Accordingly, in order to include a part of your content tree, for example, if you want to serialize the product items into the product module, we need to define the include rules that will determine the start path. The same thing if you wish to only serialize templates and renderings in your product feature project and leave out the content to be in the project layer. You can define your constraints by defining what is called rules. For example, you want to serialize all products and exclude anything under archived or legacy products. In more details, the scope property configures what content items are influenced, similar to the example before. You can define it in a specific project and specific location. Whatever you are interested in, you can define it in here. You can choose to sync everything, some things, or even nothing. Now, allow push operations property configures how content items can be influenced when pushed to your Sitecore instance. So you can decide if this item is allowed to be created and then updated or deleted, or even completely ignored. Like site-specific settings, once they are defined, you don't want to worry about overriding that every time you do a sync. And trust me, we've seen this a lot when items have been configured on production and brought down to lower environments. Now let's jump back to the Visual Studio and configure modules and rules. Before starting with configuring modules and rules, I want to highlight that we have something called globs, and the globs is the search paths used to locate your modules. So, for example, if you are planning to host your modules inside, module configuration inside one folder, you can define that on globs. If you want to host it inside each project folder, you also can define that in globs. So let's go ahead and create a new module, and after that we will configure the globs. I'll create a new configuration, a new module called project.SUGCON, and I'll save it inside the project.SUGCON folder. But as you can see, it didn't appear here. That's because we have that glob configuration. Now, the module globs, in our case, it should search for one level down and search for anything ends with module.json. Once you click OK and save, you will see that your module will appear here. Now I created another module to show you guys how we will work with the reference. And let's start with adding an include to our project SUGCON. We will start by adding an include for the templates. I will call it templates. And I'll specify the path for the templates folder. And then I'll define the Sitecore database to be master. And similar to what we discussed on the scope, we can choose the item and descendant, item and children, single item, or even descendant only. And then for the allowed push operation, we can choose to create, update, and delete, create and update, or create only. Now we have this templates defined. And as you can see, we can reference another project. We can reference the feature navigation project if there is a dependency between these modules. So since we are in a project, we can reference anything in feature, and if we are on feature, we can reference anything in foundation and so on. Now let's create another quick configuration. I'll call it rendering. Let's get the rendering path from Sitecore, and that should do the trick. Now it's very important to always place the includes in the correct order, since what comes first synced first. So if there is any dependencies between the includes, so we need to respect here, and it's easy, you can just move them up and down. Now let's go ahead and create a quick item in Sitecore. We need to create a quick folder. We'll call it legacy, to show you how we can exclude anything from the synchronization. We'll create a legacy template. And this should be part of the synchronized products by default. So if we try to pull items from Sitecore, we will see that legacy is here. So we have the legacy template here. So now let's go ahead and create a rule to exclude this legacy from the synchronization. To add a new rule, you will right-click the include and select add rule. You need to provide a path string for that exclude or for that rule. And we need to select the scope to be ignored. If you select the scope to be ignored, in this case, the synchronization will ignore this item and all its children's. Now let's save our changes and let's try to pull. We will get the following error because the rule should be a relative path, not an absolute path. So let's go back and let's fix this. Now, after making the path relative, now if we try to pull items from Sitecore, we will see that legacy is not there anymore. Now let's try to do a pull, an actual pull. So let's select all items and let's pull into our system. Similar to what we used to see in Unicorn, you will see that inside the serialization folder, there is renderings and templates, and inside templates we have these YML files. And if you try to open the YML file, you'll see that it's very similar to what we used to see in Unicorn before. Now we've seen how to serialize and push and pull Sitecore items to your local environments. You can do the same if you wish to connect to your QA environment, for example, and sync test data. By maintaining the authentication process and configuring secrets, you should be able to access different environments and sync data. And as always, with a caveat that you won't end up overriding any environment by mistake. Another aspect of your serialization process is sync these items during your deployment. Whether you are using Azure DevOps, Octopus, or even Jenkins, you can create a step to replace the existing Unicode or TDS sync in your deployment pipeline. This is where the SCS package comes into play. You can use packages as build artifacts in your continuous integration pipeline by creating them in your build pipeline and installing them in your delivery pipeline. Now we have seen it all, how to configure and set up new Sitecore content serialization experience. Over to you, Ishraq.
Thanks, Nabeel. And again, this is one of my favorite topics in Sitecore 10, which is not to decide anymore between Unicorn and TDS with the team.
Yeah.
Are you able to see my screen, or are you still sharing?
I'll still sharing now.
All right. So the last topic we want to wrap this session with is how we are utilizing the new .NET Core and the new headless experience within Sitecore 10. And again, the use of .NET Core is not new in Sitecore, right? We've seen that before in the introduction of Sitecore 9 with the new publishing service. We've seen it with the identity server. We've seen it with the universal tracker. So this is nothing new, but Sitecore has expanded its usage of .NET Core. We've seen that within the CLI. The other aspect of that would be, if I jump from that, is what we call the headless experience. So basically, this headless experience is the way where we are trying to leverage what we already have within GSS and make it available also for the backend, so don't feel bad about that. So now we have our Sitecore layer, right? So you have Sitecore, you have your front end different libraries. You work with React, Angular, whatever that is, and you have access to different headless services. So that interface instead of services are now been available for you in the form of .NET Core. So how the new how does this work? How does a new headless experience work? So now you can see that your Sitecore projects have been split into two. You have your Sitecore instance. Your Sitecore instance, if you look at it from a CD perspective, you have your CD server. It includes your Sitecore items, and it's a lightweight. It's no longer holding any of the rendering information, but rather we have a new rendering host. This is a separate dedicated lightweight server that contains your code, your static resources, everything related to your rendering. And these two communicate whenever a request comes. So when a visitor visits your site and there's a request, what happens? It requests the rendering host. So using that, or what we call the layout service client, it triggers a service call to the headless service, and specifically to the rendering to the Sitecore layout service. This service actually gets your content, transform that into a JSON object, and send it back to you. So we have our view model. It's sent then back to the rendering engine. It does its work with rendering the assets and different stuff and get it back to your Sitecore. So what does this mean? Now having this isolated between your the backend and your front end, Sitecore gives us the option to leverage more and more languages in the future. So it's no longer just these front-end libraries or .NET Core. We can introduce more and more languages into that. And it's as simple as adding a JSON rendering to your site instead of the normal rendering components. And again, this is a new thing, so there's a limitation towards that. Just be aware of if you want to opt into that kind of an experience and development, to look into what's there, what's in there, what's not in there. Definitely Sitecore as a platform going to evolve. Lots of these things going to be available. Just have an eye into that. And that's actually a wrap. Thank you guys for having us. These are our details on Slack and on Twitter. Feel free to reach out anytime, and we're happy to be part of this event with all of you. And that's it.
All right. Any questions for Ishraq or Nabeel? Feel free to post it on YouTube or Twitch. I don't think we've received any questions yet.
I have a question, if I can ask.
Please.
Yeah. I mean, are there any performance consideration when we are choosing two headlesses? I mean, one is ASP.NET Core and another one is a JSS. So are there any performance considerations, I mean, around that?
Yeah, there's always going to be performance considerations, especially when you work with heavy sites that has like lots of rendering, right? So now the pressure is moved from your CD to your rendering host. So these servers, because it's going to receive these different requests, you might end up needing to scale out. So having a cache strategy in place is always is a good practice. So yeah, we're shifting, like the performance consideration between different servers, but there's always an opportunity to overload one server. You scale that out. It's cheaper than scaling the CDs, but eventually, if you increase the number of your rendering hosts to accommodate the performance stuff, you're gonna scale out your CD instances as well. So it's a trade-off. But yeah, there's always gonna be that thing.
Yeah, thank you, Ishraq. Thank you. It's a wonderful session. Anyone else have any question? I don't see anything in the stream. Okay. We already have next speaker ready. Nick. Any more questions? No?
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Ishraq and Nabeel.
Thank you. Thank you for having
Thank
us.
you.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Now is the time for solidarity in the face of this threat to all of humanity. I implore leaders to stand together and heed this appeal